In this video, we will scrape a JSON endpoint that is secured using basic authentication into Prometheus via the JSON exporter, and we'll also wrap the JSON exporter in basic authentication, so end to end we are nice and secure. First, install the requirements using pip install-r requirements.txt because the JSON endpoint that we will scrape is written in Python using fast API. So pip install-r requirements.txt. Next, let's start up the app, and let's just have a quick look at the app code. Don't worry, all the links to there's a GitHub repo down in the description if you want to actually grab the code. But let's quickly run through this. We have a single endpoint here on the root, and we're going to return a JSON file, and we're expecting some credentials to be inputted, and of course very bad security, but I am hard coding the username and the password, and if the username and password are not correct, we're just sending back a 401 unauthorized. Otherwise, if the username and password are correct, we are sending back a JSON, which is my first metric and the value of 25. So loading up the web server, we of course are presented with the login box. If I cancel this, we get the not authenticated message. So let's just log in, Gardner IT, password 123, and it works. We get my first metric 25. Wonderful. What's next? Well, next is to configure and start up the JSON exporter. Again, if you haven't seen the previous video, links above, I recommend watching that first, because we do this without any kind of security or authentication, so that will give you a good grounding of what's going on. But anyway, let's configure the JSON exporter now, and we do this with a YAML file. Again, we are saying, well, go scrape my first metric, and this time use basic auth to log in to the JSON endpoint. So Gardner IT, and look at a password file that I've previously saved called temp, in the temp directory called mysecret.txt. You can do that, you can say password. I highly recommend not doing that because the risk is just too great that you commit this file to Git and all of a sudden your password is in plain text. But the temp mysecret file is literally just password 123. But the advantage there is you don't need to commit that into Git. That can live separately. Okay, so let's spin up the JSON exporter. Again, you need to download that binary, extract it, see the previous video, and pass it the config.file parameter. That will start on 7979. Now, looking at the probe endpoint of the JSON exporter, explained in the previous video, but it's JSON exporters on 7979, and we're probing a target, of course, of 8123, which is the actual app server. It works. You can see it has transformed the JSON into Prometheus, but you can probably see the issue here that we've gone from a secure JSON endpoint with basic authentication to a wide open Prometheus endpoint. So now you've lost all of your security. Anyone who gets access to this, your environment and this Prometheus, can just look at the Prometheus page. And, you know, what's the point in having basic auth on your JSON, but not the Prometheus? So let's figure out how we do that now. So I've stopped the JSON exporter. The JSON app is still running. Nothing changed there. And I'm passing in a new config file, web.config.file, and I'll show you that in a moment. But let's run that, and this time when we refresh, we also get a basic authentication box for the JSON exporter, which is exactly what we want. We don't want unauthenticated users to see this. So how did this work? Well, we are saying when the JSON exporter starts up, we need to add basic auth to this, and we're saying, well, the user is Gardner IT, and the password is this seemingly random string of whatever. What is this? Well, this is actually bcrypt. So depending on your operating system, there will be different ways to bcrypt hash the password that you want to set. But in my case on a Mac, I use htpassword, and when I paste this command, it asks me for a password. I am just going to happen to use the same password 123, but of course, you can use something different. So the JSON endpoint and the JSON exporter endpoint don't necessarily have to be the same password or even username, of course. But I'm just going to say password 123, and it spits out this hashed value that we then put into here. That is the file, notice, that we pass to the JSON exporter. So now that's perfect. We've got 2 of the 3 components in the chain authenticated, behind an authentication box. We've got the JSON and Prometheus and the Prometheus output itself completely secure behind this this basic authentication box. The third link in the chain, of course, is Prometheus, because Prometheus is going to come in and try and scrape this page. And of course, because it's behind basic auth, it won't be able to. So how do we add basic auth to Prometheus to tell it the login details for this page? First, I'll start up Prometheus with the secure config file, and let's just double check that works. Localhost 9090. Let's go to status and then targets, and we can see our probe is up and it was scraped recently. And if we go to graph and search for my first metric, we get a value. Perfect, it's working. Let's jump back and show the config file to understand how it's working. This would be a Prometheus config file that's insecure, that's default. We're scraping every 5 seconds. We give it a job name. We say, please go reach out to 7979 and probe on 8123 at the probe endpoint. So what do we need to add to this to get to give Prometheus basic authentication ability to log into this probe endpoint? Well, it's actually quite simple. Again, we have the scrape interval, the job name, the metrics path, of course, all standard. And then we have this basic auth username. And again, you can say password. Again, please don't. Please refer back to the secret txt file, and the rest of it is the same. And that's it. Now Prometheus is going to, when it hits this probe endpoint, it's going to log in with a username and whatever password you set in the password file. And as you've seen, everything will work. It will just scrape the endpoint as normal. And there you go, a completely end-to-end secure chain secured with basic auth. Thank you to YouTube user Mr. Fisselort, who actually asked this question and inspired this video. So thank you very much for the comment and the suggestion. And if you have comments or suggestions, please do submit them, and I'm happy to research and create content around that. If you've liked this video, please do hit like, subscribe, thumbs up, all that good stuff. It really does help the algorithm. And as always, hope you found it useful. I'll see you again next time. Bye.